Picture the electron transport chain, and again, if you think of the mitochondrion, all those folded membranes inside the mitochondrion, we'll have a look at a picture in a second. So on those membranes, or embedded in the surface of those membranes, is the electron transport chain. So far, all of the other stuff, the Krebs cycle stuff that's in the mitochondria, that happens in the fluid part, right, in the matrix part. But on the folded membranes, you have these proteins sitting there, right, embedded in the membrane, and there's a series of them. They're kind of all one beside each other, and there's a few of them in a row. And think of so this is the electron transport chain. It's a bunch of proteins all sitting there lined up, okay? And what they do is they take these electrons, and it's a bit like a game of pass the parcel, right? The first electron transport molecule will take those electrons. Some of the energy will be given up, and as it passes the electrons from one electron transport protein to the next, as it goes along, it loses some energy. It's a bit like the wrapping around the parcel, right? So another, a small bit of energy is lost every time it gets passed from one protein to the next. Okay. So obviously the NAD is recycled and it goes back and it's available for all the uses that it was used for already. And these electrons, like I said, they hop along, or they're passed really from one electron. They're transported from one electron transport protein to the next. But bear in mind, there's these hydrogen atom, or the hydrogen ions, these protons, that are also, jump out of the taxi at the electron transport chain, and they just hang around waiting, and you'll see what the point of them is in a second. So the electrons release energy, and there's all kinds of extra detail to this story that we now don't need to know about. But basically, the idea is that ultimately, or eventually, the energy that's used, that's released here in the electron transport chain, is used in a place nearby by another molecule that's not part of the electron transport chain, but it's used. The energy is then used to make ATP. Right? There's a molecule called an ATP synthase, right? And just that it's not part of the electron transport chain, but it's right there beside it. And it's going to use the energy that's released from the electron transport chain to make ATP, right? So the point is, you just need to know that the energy that's released from the electron transport chain is used to make ATP, okay? So that ATP is generated. Those electrons then eventually come to the end of the road, hopping along the electron transport chain, and they have to be taken by something as they reach the end of the last electron transport protein, right? They've got to go somewhere. So in humans, that final electron acceptor is oxygen molecules. So those two electrons jump or are taken by an oxygen molecule, okay? Don't worry about this half oxygen molecule. There's no such thing as a half an oxygen molecule. It's just that for every pair of electrons, it's a half oxygen molecule's worth of oxygen, right? But obviously it's, and the other thing is that it combines with these hydrogen ions, right? So these hydrogen ions combine with the oxygen and the electrons to form the other waste product of respiration, which is water. So we've seen where the carbon dioxide is formed, right? That's formed in two places. But now we see where the water is formed, and the water is formed at the very, very end. Excuse me. The other thing I should point out to you is that none of this will happen unless there's an oxygen sitting there waiting at the end to take those electrons off, right? It's like as if there's no oxygen available, the tap is turned off, right? The tap's closed for this flow of these electrons that we've seen all the way through being taken by NAD. All that traffic stops dead as soon as you shut off the oxygen supply, okay? So that explains why if we starve our muscles, for example, of oxygen, they will switch into producing lactate, which is a kind of just a stopgap solution, because we can't tolerate lactate very well, lactic acid in our muscles. You know that, you know what that feels like. So it will literally start to break down your the muscle tissue, right? The lactic acid will. So we can do it for a short space of time, but as soon as once the cramps start, it kind of forces us to stop. And the way to kind of recover then is you just breathe deeply, stop exercising, you breathe deeply, and the oxygen levels will build up again in your cells. And the initial amount of oxygen that's used can't be straight away used, or that you take in can't be used straight away to switch on respiration back on again, right? Some of that oxygen that you get from stopping and recovering or whatever has to be used to get rid of the lactic acid that's built up in your muscles. So oxygen will be used from your bloodstream, will be used to break down that lactic acid. And once that's all kind of been removed, then respiration can kick off again and you're back to normal. Okay. Okay, so water is one of the products of this. The other product of the electron transport chain, of course, is NAD plus. Sorry, and ATP. So you can see from this, by the way, that with all the NADs that are arriving from all the different stages, you get you get 3 ATPs worth from every one NADH that arrives. Okay, and look, you don't need to worry about, you don't need to get all, into the accountancy of ATP. We don't need to, textbooks will tell you that there's 36 molecules of ATP worth, some will say 38 or whatever. That's kind of not really right. That's in theory, but realistically, you'd be lucky to get sort of 28, 26, 28. Even the most efficient muscle cells aren't that good, right? And they lose energy as heat and all kinds of other stuff, right? So you don't get 36, and don't worry about those magic numbers. They never ask you that. The point is that you get a huge, massive, way more ATPs from aerobic respiration than you do from anaerobic respiration. And this is why. It's mostly down to the electron transport chain. You saw that the Krebs cycle produces a bit, not much. There's a little bit from glycolysis. All the money's made here at the electron transport chain.